deliveries, automatic fill service, 24-hour emergency equipment service, and convenient budget plans. They also stock a large inventory of replacement.
Mike Sarnoff here, and if you'd like to talk to Mary Michele, 241-1310, the number to call. We are continuing a astrological horoscope look. What's the right word? I don't even know.
Well, the horoscope is actually the circle. It's the round circle, and astrology deals with it's kind of like the word philosophy or any kind of ology. It's the study of, and astro, of course, is stars. And at one time, astronomy and astrology were part of the same science. Of course, I might get a little bit of feedback on this from astronomers who don't feel that there's any particular correlation. But of course, in the olden days, man was always looking for purpose and reason as to why, there were storms, or, the crops didn't come in at certain times, or, when to go to war and that kind of thing. So they looked at the calendars that they set up, and they were really amazingly accurate in the different kinds of calendars that they came up with. But they looked at these calendars as being part of what we call more of a circular way of thinking. If you think about time, the way we usually measure time, I talked about this a little bit before when I talked about the Celtic and the 13 lunar months, and we have the 12 months, which are it's a solar concept. It's much easier, more logical. The numbers work better when you work with the 12 months of the year. But, it's equally as important to realize that most things in life are not just about one level of consciousness. Usually when we talk to people, we're talking in many different, on many different levels. I always remember in the Woody Allen movie, Manhattan. Do you remember that movie? Mm-hmm. When he was talking to Diane Keaton, and they had these little bubbles over their heads, and they were talking to each other, but they were thinking something else.
Isn't that the way most people act, though? I mean, I would think, well, never mind. That's not the right subject for right now. But a question. You had talked about the Celtic, or I would say Celtic, except I'm not from Boston. But if you're talking about the Celtic way of looking at things, Halloween is coming up next week. There are 4 major holidays, if I'm not mistaken. We started on this discussion last week, and we never quite got finished with it. I wonder if you might go back to it. We are talking to Mary Michele, and if you have a question about astrology, give her a call, 241-1310. We have an open line now. What about the Celtic way of doing things?
Well, they believed, they understood very early on the Sumerians, which was the area of which is now present-day Iraq and Iran, and most of the cultures, the South American Indians and the Chinese, they had all, figured out how to measure time in the sense of how the Earth moved and at which times where there was more light and less light, which is how, the equinoxes and the solstices were not created, but named, let's say, worked out. But in a lot of these places, they also looked very closely at what are considered the in-between times. And in the Bible, they talk about it, Matthew, Luke, John. Oh no, here I go again. Well, anyway, they correlate to the 4 seasons as they really begin. And if you think about it, the 1st of November is the time when the Earth really starts to die. Up until then, there has been kind of life. There's been greenery. But in the fall, and particularly usually, I know that everything's moving a little peculiarly these days with the trees and the weather and so on, but most of the time, the 1st of November is the time when the Earth starts to freeze, and it gets very hard and very cold. And really these in-between times, these in-between holidays, were about when the Earth changes. And the 1st of February, which is also known as Groundhog Day, or the 2nd, sometimes these things would go off a day, is when, the groundhog comes out, but the idea is that the Earth is soft enough so that there's no more ice, or there's the possibility that there's no more ice.
Okay, dumb question. Mm-hmm. Groundhog Day is February 2nd. But when one thinks of, the groundhog coming out, it's Puxatawny Phil, the Earth doesn't get any cooler up in Alaska, or warmer. It's still frozen solid. I wonder how people can... I'm playing the doubting Thomas here. I just don't understand
Right, well, there are different myths, and this is something that I would like to explore, and I would appreciate any information that anybody has along these lines. I would like to explore certain myths and how they correlate. So it might not actually be in Alaska or Siberia about the ice, but there might be some other thing that they've noticed in the environment and nature that changes around the 1st of February. Also in South America or Australia. I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah, but they're beginning to go from summer to winter there. They're going from summer to fall. They're directly opposite where we are.
Right, but the point is that these are points in time that would relate somehow to the cycles of the Earth. That's really what it's more about how the different mythologies came up, the different concepts, and it was because people observed certain stories or certain myths. They're kind of like dreams. You know how in dreams you can think about Jello and iron. Now, one doesn't have anything to do with the other, but for some reason they make up some kind of a message for you.
All right. Before we go any further with this, we have a caller on the line right now. Ann is on the phone. Ann's date of birth is March 3rd, 1945. Good morning, Ann. You're on with Mary Michele.
Hi.
Good morning, Ann. Did you have a particular question?
Yeah, I've recently run across an old boyfriend from a long time ago who, expresses some sort of interest in a romance, but very reserved. I think he's recently separated, and I wondered if you can tell if there's going to be anything there.
Okay, you have the sun in Pisces, you have the moon in Scorpio, you have Mercury in Pisces, Saturn in